All right, Georgie, welcome from the Women's Collective. How you going today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this. This is my first official podcast appearance. So very
Feature,
happy to be
nice,
here.
awesome. Hopefully, the first of many.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're hopping on from a mobile phone. Let's just hope that Telstra or whoever your provider is working hard to make sure that we're communicating
Yeah.
efficiently and effectively today.
Fingers crossed.
So let's start with what you do. So the Women's Collective, explain what you do as a kind of brief overline before we get into the nitty gritty stuff.
Yeah, sure. So the Women's Collective came about because I started my own business when I was 22. I started a nanny agency here in Canberra, and I found that to be so challenging on just so many levels. I had not come from a business background, so nobody in my family ran their own business. I didn't know anybody who did. I sort of accidentally fell into running my own business and starting my own business. And I just found it such a challenging experience, and I didn't have anybody in my circles that knew what I was going through or could support me or could be a great resource for me. So the Women's Collective was born really out of a place of wanting to have people that were having the same journey as me, experiencing the same things, that we could essentially make that journey a little bit easier and a little bit better for small business startups. So I started with a conference in Canberra that was a 65 person conference. And then from there, I mean, it was only supposed to be a one off conference, but from there, so many people just said, well, what's next for this? And like, what's happening with Women's Collective? And so it kind of grew from there. So the Women's Collective, in essence, is a community of women in business or a dream to start their own business. And it's a place in the world slash internet that you can get support, resources. I do coaching. I have lots of services available to help you know what you're doing a little bit better, especially when it comes to social media. And
Mhm.
of course, we also do events and workshops as well.
Okay, wow. So it just started as a conference. When was this? When was the conference?
Yeah, the conference was in 2014. Yeah,
Okay,
2014, I think it
yeah,
was.
it's
So
about
quite
five
a
years
few
ago.
years ago now. And
Yeah.
it's just blossomed from there.
Wow. So you mentioned the nannying business that you had. So did you run both simultaneously side by side for a little while or?
Yeah, I did. And the only way that I was really able to do that in the beginning was to focus all of my time and energy on the nanny agency, because that is not really a job that you can do half-hearted. And in the first few years, the Women's Collective really was just a digital space for women to connect and bounce ideas off each other, and then have networking every now and again. And only really in the last, I would say, 6 months to a year, have I been able to monetize the Women's Collective and really turn it into the brand and the business that I envisaged it to be all of those years ago.
Okay, so is it fair to say you started with building a community and that was fairly
Yeah,
organic growth?
absolutely. I think I always knew that there was room for growth with the Women's Collective brand, but I never wanted it to feel forced. I never
Mm.
wanted to try and monetize that business where it didn't feel right to. And so I did spend a lot of time just investing in those relationships, getting to know people, building my social media channels before I decided where I was going to go with that. And I really let the audience decide what they wanted first. So one thing that has really grown in the last, I would say, 6 months alone is my profile as a business coach. So I've just started recently becoming a Instagram and business coach. And that was really born out of a lot of people essentially emailing me and asking me if I did it, and could I work with them. And given that I have a teaching background, that was what I studied at uni. I'm all too happy to teach people, and
Yeah,
especially when it
wow.
comes to business, because it is a huge passion of mine. But that was not something that I ever set out to do, or to become. It was very led by the people in my community telling me that that's what they would find most helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So not only did you started because you had a need for it and there was kind of that authentic, genuine need for it, but then it
Yeah.
grew because everyone else needed it and now it's continued to evolve and you're kind of almost your hopes and your dreams and your goals are aligning with what the people want. Is that kind of fair to
Yeah,
say?
Absolutely. I think it's just been a really beautiful marrying of me knowing what my strengths are and being able to share those with other people, and then also them being able to seek out valuable advice and a service that works really well for them. One thing that I found quite interesting is that I do have an online course which is very successful, but a lot of people that will do my online course will also actually invest in one-on-one time with me,
Hmm.
even though they have access to basically all of the information that I know, they still really want to have that one-on-one time. And I think that that's been a really interesting thing to realize, that especially in this world of this digital world,
Yeah.
people still really crave that one-on-one time and that one-on-one assistance.
Oh, completely. I mean, we Future Theory, we do web design and marketing, and we still find we're such a digital business. And one would say that you look at the traditional methods of communication, and web and digital media are moving you away from that kind of traditional methods of communication, and yet people really love to interact in person and come and take a seat and have a conversation and look you in the eye. It's funny because you would think that it's kind of the opposite, but I
Mm.
don't know if you agree, but I would say that people are kind of coming back to that, let's meet, let's have something, substantial, something that you can kind of touch and hold and see and,
Yeah.
within the same space.
Definitely. I think it's just been this really interesting spin off from social media where we have this ability to connect with more people than ever possible just by sending them a message or giving them a follow or commenting on their photos. And yet, when it boils down to it, we want to actually make those relationships in person and take them off digital platforms to really connect with those people. Like most of the people that I have in my life at the moment, whether they be clients or friends, I have honestly met them on and from Instagram, but
Hmm.
there's always become a point where we've wanted to make that an in-person relationship, because I just don't think that, as amazing as social media is, I just don't think anything replaces human connection.
Yeah, exactly. And it legitimizes it at the end of the day and
Hmm.
gives you credibility, gives them credibility. So you're not just this face who runs an online course, but you're this
Yeah,
person who they can interact with. Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome.
absolutely.
So when you started back in 2014, how old were you then, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm pretty sure I was 23.
Pretty sure.
It's been 5 years. Yeah, that's right, 23.
Yeah.
So I'm
Okay.
now
So
28.
28
So
now.
5 years.
Okay. Wow. So have you transitioned? Is the Women's Collective your sole income, or is it your main project at the moment, or how's that kind of set up in your life?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. It's now kind of 50-50 with the nanny agency.
Hmm.
Um, I am at the moment really trying to work out what is my passive income and what is the income that I work for. So the nanny agency over the last 5 years, because I started that when I was 22, so I have been doing that for a bit longer now. And when I first started that, pretty much everything, in order to actually move the needle in my business, I needed to be physically there, present, doing that. And I would say one of the biggest challenges for that business was having to work out how I could still get the business ticking over without me physically being in the middle of it, because you can't grow if everything is dependent on you.
Relied
So
on
I've
you.
spent a
Yeah.
lot of time investing in that. So the nanny agency will always need me at a certain level to
Hmm.
oversee and to run that work. And I just don't think it has the passive income potential that the Women's Collective has. Whereas, with the Women's Collective, it's an amazing opportunity for me to really look at my passive income streams. So I have now, in the last few weeks, put onto the website some things like a hashtag ebook and a collaboration proposal that influencers can use when they approach brands or vice versa. And
Hmm.
so they obviously I've invested the time in the beginning to write them, but then when they sell, there's no input from me.
Yes.
And so at the moment, the income is 50-50 between the nanny agency and the Women's Collective, but the Women's Collective income at this point, and increasingly so, is becoming more passive, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the good thing there also is that um, it's a well-known fact that these online businesses, the more passive kind of businesses, have higher margins, which you know, it's not about just making more money, but ultimately having more of that financial capacity and freedom there to then reinvest back into
Yeah.
whatever you're doing. And I love that you help people. And yes, you know, people say, oh, you know, why don't, if you really want to help someone, why don't you do it for free? But at the end of the day, you need money to live. Everyone needs, you know,
Mm.
finances to make things happen. Plus,
Mm.
you probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but you find that when you offer free advice, people don't necessarily value it as much as when they
Mm.
pay for it.
Absolutely.
And do you
Price
find
is
that?
absolutely perception when it comes to valuing the information that is given to you. I think it's a really interesting point what you say with online websites now, online businesses. There is a real interesting climate when it comes to what you charge for your products. I have always been really comfortable with my pricing across both of my businesses because I've lined them up with, you know, what's appropriate for the market, and I've been really clear and really transparent with both myself and the customer. When it
Mhm.
comes to something like business coaching, I mean, that is notoriously can be a very expensive industry to be in. But what I've been able to do, which I'm really excited about, is with my documents and ebooks that have been pre-written, I've been able to put them at a price point where pretty much anybody can afford them.
Mhm.
And then if somebody does want that one-on-one time, or they want extra help or assistance, then, and they have more of a budget to do so, then I can always work with them as well. But I think one thing that I'm really proud of is being able to be having an entry level price point of just a couple of, you know, $10 or $20 for some of my online services, so
Mhm.
that nobody is actually excluded from being able to better themselves or better their business. And it doesn't cost me any money. Once I've written that product and put it up on the website, it doesn't really cost me much money to keep it
No.
up there. So why not give it a affordable price point for people?
Yeah, plus obviously, you know, the more downloads you get, the more your the price point or your investment into the product decreases per unit, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty
Yeah.
of it all. Let's touch on that quickly. How did you, so you talked about pricing. Now, when you worked out pricing, it's always a point of contention, I think, because even you talk, you know, touching on business coaching, I know people who spent $5,000 on a business coach or a business coaching package and got arguably, or well, they feel much worse services than someone who charged them $100 an hour and did, you know, 10 intensive hours of training. So how do you price yourself in a way that, you know, you've mentioned that you're really comfortable with the pricing and you're transparent with it, which is an amazing thing. I know a lot of people struggle with that. I still struggle with, you know, charging people money, even where I've seen that
Mm.
they've
Mm.
got value. Sometimes they come to me and say, Germaine, you know, don't stress. This was more than worth what you
Mm.
know. First of all, you were transparent, so you told me that this hour of consulting will cost this much.
Yep.
Second, you've given me so much value that I would pay you double what you said. So you
Yep.
know, don't feel bad about the fact that you're charging for it. But how did you
Yeah.
start pricing? Did you look at your competitors? Is that an important thing, or did you look at how much you want to make, say, per hour, and give yourself, you know, I'm worth $20 an hour, and start from there? Or how did you make that start? Okay, so we had a bit of a technology fail, but now we're back. What was it? Your phone overheated?
Oh yeah, so how's this for Brisbane winter? My phone overheated because it's too hot up here, and it cut out. So we had to wait for it to cool down again.
There we go. Well, we're back. Before we got cut off rudely by technology, we were talking about pricing. So you talked
Yep,
about how, you know, you've been very transparent, you've been very honest, you've been very
yep,
comfortable with your pricing. I think that's
yep,
that's something that not everyone is able to say when it comes to how they price their business and how they've felt about pricing. I certainly
mm-hmm,
can't say that I've always been. Even now, I'm sometimes uncomfortable because I want to help
mm-hmm,
people, and you know, charging
yeah,
it sort of seems sort of counterintuitive. But tell
mm-hmm,
me, how did you start doing that? Did you look at your competitors? Was that the first step, or did you set, like, you know, Georgie wants to be paid $20 an hour and went from there, or what did you do?
yeah, yeah. Look, I more did the latter. So I I did definitely struggle when I was pricing some of the women's collective services because I had not set out to become a coach. I didn't have a background of coaching or repertoire of coaching. All I had was my teaching degree, which came in handy but is not entirely relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So I essentially just picked quite a low figure for the industry and felt that that was a really great place to start with an introductory pricing point. And then what I did was I asked my clientele to fill in a survey at the end of sessions with me just to say, how did this rate with your expectations? How do you feel this was for your how much value you got versus what I charged, and
Mm-hmm.
really just asked for feedback from my actual clients as to what they thought that the price point was valued at. And then over time, I have slowly increased my pricing to reflect not just my experience, but the outcomes and the results from the clients that I've worked with, and also more in line with industry standards. I
Of
think industry
course.
standards is a bit of a hard one because
Yeah.
when it comes to coaching, sometimes I genuinely feel like people just pluck a figure out of the air. But yeah, and so I'm kind of at the point now where I'm really comfortable with my pricing. I have a goal that I want to get to for my hourly rate, but I'm not in any rush to get there. I really want to use this as an opportunity to keep building my repertoire and keep
Mm-hmm.
building my experience to justify a higher rate in the future.
Sure. So, when did you first charge for a client through, apart from, so the conference was a paid conference, was it, or was it a free?
Yeah, so the conference was paid. The ticket there was a ticket price, but it was, and we made a small profit, but it was more around breaking even on those costs because I had never pulled off an event like that of that size before. So
Mm-hmm.
it was mostly about making sure I didn't lose money, which luckily I didn't because it was quite successful.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, when I first charged for my coaching, I looked at what I felt my time was worth in terms of how much feedback and value I could provide within that time. So an hour, how much realistically can I give somebody in 1 hour, and then also incorporated things like my travel costs and any parking or costs that were involved in the actual service delivery, and then take out tax, and then make sure that what was left over was, I felt, a fair representation of the effort that I put in.
Sure. Okay. And so when was it that you charged for your services, or that you first charged for your services?
My first ever paid coaching consult was in August of last year,
Mm-hmm.
and it came out of somebody asking me if I did coaching, and I said sure. I think one of my biggest tips, or one of my biggest beliefs when it comes to business, is if somebody asks if you do something, and it is with the caveat being that it's in the scope of what you can actually provide,
Mm.
you say yes and you figure out the details later.
Later, yes.
Obviously, you don't say yes if you have no idea what you're doing. You say, no, sorry, I can't do that. But if
But if
you
it's
have
kind of
done this
within
work in a
reach,
different form
yes.
previously, but just not the form that somebody's asking you, then you say, yes, of course I can do that, and you work out the details later. So I said yes, and then I booked that in. I said to that person, look, I'll do it as a trial price of this amount, just because I haven't done a formal service like this before.
Mm.
And then so I got the feedback, and then I started with my introductory pricing, saying I now offer this service.
Yeah. So when you started your pricing, what would you say, if you don't mind, talking about relative to now, what the percentage was? The reason I asked the question is to look at, I think some people get lost in the fantasy of, as soon as I start, I don't have to do a lot of work. I can start charging top dollar. I don't have to put in the effort.
Oh, of course.
And I want to touch on the fact that, not only did you start charging 4 years after your first event for this business, and
Yep.
obviously that, there's a lot of work that went in there. So I want to touch on
Yeah.
that effort, and then also show how you don't have to start with the final pricing. So
Yeah,
as an
absolutely.
approximate percentage, what did you charge your first client relative to what you're charging them
So
now?
I'm happy to give you details. That's no problem. So my first two clients, I charged out at $80 an hour for coaching.
Mm.
And now I am sitting at a price point of 170 an hour for coaching, which is still really affordable. I'm still really happy with that pricing. My goal is to get to 250 an hour,
Mm-hmm.
which I wholeheartedly believe that I can provide that much content within an hour's service, and I could probably do it right this minute. But it's I am an overachiever and a perfectionist, and so until I can, the way that I see my pricing is that until I can provide at least $250 an hour worth of content to a client that I'm least comfortable with, then
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to charge it to the people that I'm most comfortable with. And so the way that my coaching works is I give the rough indication of every hour that you have with me in a session equates to about a month's worth of work and things to implement. So that's
Fantastic.
how I've kind of broken down my pricing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that was going to be my next question, because obviously you can value yourself at $250 an hour, but
Yeah.
I can guarantee anyone who knows what they're talking about, that the actual value in part is, tenfold, if not even
Yes.
more. So that
Yeah.
when someone sits down with you
Absolutely.
for an hour, they spend $250, but that they save $3,000 that they would have spent with a web developer, or $5,000 that they would have spent with a strategist for their marketing. And I guess the real benefit with those kinds of services, that especially working with you, is that you know what is required in terms of what you have to do to get there. So what you're giving them is essentially all the information that they need, all the theoretical knowledge, but then they can go and implement that and put in the labor. So they essentially save the labor cost. Is that generally how it kind of
Definitely.
happens?
Yeah, look, I would absolutely agree with that. So, the way that I see it is I have, through the last 4 years of my work, learnt um, apps, programs, websites, done all of this manual research and manual, understanding of the best practice way to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And I've then condensed that learning and then turned it into a program. So with my one-on-one coaching services, I always will tweak them individually for each person. However, I have a general, I would say, probably 3 hour program, so that if someone says to me, look, I've got 3 hours, I mean, I very, very rarely do a 3 hour session. They're usually
Mm-hmm.
1 to 2 hours,
Yes.
just because they're so overwhelming in terms of how much content you get. But I essentially have a program that I have created that goes through everything, including, okay, well, what's your business? What's the structure? How does it make money? How can you scale up that money? How do your social media platforms fit in? Which ones do you need to be on? How do you use them? How do you differentiate content? How do you then convert sales from that to fit into your business model that we talked about in the beginning? So I essentially
Mm-hmm.
have this humongous program that I follow. And so also another thing that's really helpful for me is that when somebody says to me, okay, well, like, how does your, I must say I'm pretty lucky. Like when people want to come and work with me, they don't actually ever really question it. They just say,
Yeah.
I want to work with you, and we figure it out when we get there. But if anybody ever did say to me, okay, well, what will we actually talk about and what will we actually cover? I can give them a list of 20 things, and it's about how much we get through in that session and what's most relevant to them.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it's again one of those things where business owners generally time poor. So not only are you imparting a lot of information, you're also imparting that information to people who have limited time to implement it. And there's little value probably in spending 3 hours in one go when they know that they can only put in 10 hours this month, as
Yeah,
opposed to spend an hour with you and implement that in the month and then come back and have, because ultimately it's a step-by-step process, isn't it, growing a business and working on a business?
absolutely. Yeah, like I mean, honestly, in my sessions, I go in wanting to cover. I know in my own head what I want to be able to cover and what I think is going to be the best return on investment for that person. But often we don't even get through anywhere near what I want to get through, because when you actually sit down and break it down and impart all of that information, and then they know they have to go home and then implement that, it ends up being so much more work. So I don't ever have the problem. I'm very lucky. I don't ever have the problem of someone having finished the session with me going, okay, well, like, what do I do now? Or
Yes.
where to from here? They always go away with more than enough information.
That's awesome. Let's touch on the community side of things. So you've got a Facebook group, a Facebook page, and an Instagram page. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
Yep.
correct. So the way that I've set up my digital presence is I've got a great mix of, you know, bigger platforms where women can engage with each other and they don't really need me in that. So I'll facilitate the discussion, but you know, people can connect with each other, and so that's on my bigger platforms, which are my Instagram and my Facebook. But then I also have a closed Facebook group where I share a little bit more personally with the women in that group. I put daily prompts for questions or conversation starters. I provide tips and tricks. And so that allows me to work with the women in there a little bit closer. And then I also have another group that is on Facebook, that is even smaller again, for all my alumni course members. So they are the people that will often get things like, if I've got a trial service coming up, I will offer it to them first because I know that they've worked with me in the past. They've already invested with me. I want to reward that investment, but also I know that they're going to give me, because we already have a good relationship, they're going to give me really honest feedback and really practical feedback. So I do have a few different levels of how people can work and connect with me, but it's always, you know, I'm not pushy at all. Like, I try not to push any of those links. If you go onto Facebook and you look for the group, you can find it, you can join it. Every now and again, I'll put, you know, a call out to say, hey, by the way, we have this group if you want to join. But I've very much let it be community led and individual persons led, because there's no point in me, you know, pushing people into a community that they don't want to be in. And I think that's why it works really well, because I've never ever pushed that growth. It's just always been organic.
And what does that growth look like? Do you remember what, I mean, you started in 2013, 2014 with, I would assume, zero real followers.
Yeah.
And then what's that looked like since?
So the Facebook pages, I think I started up, and I actually got a notification about this yesterday. So it was 4 years ago for the Instagram and the Facebook page, pretty much to the day. And obviously we started at literally no one, and now we're sitting at, we've just hit 2,000 on Facebook. I have 680 people in the closed groups. That's 680 direct connections, and then we've got 12,500 on Instagram.
Wow. So do you find that, obviously a lot of effort, 12,500, not easy to reach. What in terms of the value that each platform provides, or what I'm trying to touch on here is, what do you find is, say, the type of content that is responded with? What kind of engagement do you see in each platform? Because no doubt they're going to be different. And then ultimately, what kind of direct what kind of financial value can you attribute it to those groups, to your business? So I am a fan, for example, with our clients, we tell them to stick to one platform and get it really, really good and really correct to start off with, and then kind of expand from there. And the big thing there also is to work out, before they decide on what platform, is to work out how's this going to relate to their business activities, and how can they draw some sort of value, because putting in effort is good, but at some point you need to be able to extract value. So what do you find in terms of, you know, Instagram and Facebook? Where would you say which is the lead gen for you? Do you look at that kind of thing? What's your experience been?
Sure. Look, I think it's a really interesting question and a really valid point. One of the main common mistakes that I see with clients is that they have a Facebook page and an Instagram page, and they create the exact same content and then put it across both of those pages, and they don't differentiate that at all. Unfortunately, where you're gonna come unstuck is that the types of content that Instagram and Facebook are built for are different. So yes, there's similar features across both of those platforms, but Instagram is very picture based. Obviously, it is very aesthetic based. It is a platform that is built around aspiration and inspiration, whereas Facebook is much more a platform for disseminating information about your business or your service, FAQs and more detailed information, because that is a more text-based platform. So in answer to your question, what I choose to do is I do a lot of picture things, obviously on Instagram. I do a lot of stories, so things like, showing my life, what I'm doing, and also making it the most beautiful possible. So, I have a tagline in my Instagram that says "aesthetic queen," which makes me laugh because it does sound really ridiculous. But honestly, the amount of people that comment on that and think that that is exactly what sums up my platform, and that's why they follow it, because it is all the same color scheme, the same style of photography, the same kind of content. That definitely sums up my Instagram. And then on Facebook, that's a place that I really allow for better discussion and deeper discussion. So Instagram is more a place for me to share about me and my journey, and then Facebook is where I bring in community. So I ask people how they're going with their journey, what they're doing, what they're struggling with, how I can assist them, and we get more of a conversation from that platform.
Yeah. And ultimately, see, I find that, I put a lot of effort into my social media, probably not as much as I should be, but that's going to be changing moving forward. But just because everyone's time poor, and it's one of those things that, like you mentioned, when you started, you didn't have too many people surrounding you to help you necessarily in the business side of things. Talking to the average person, talking to my friends, they tend to think, Instagram or social media in general is this bad thing that's all about, your ego and boosting your ego. So, taking a bunch of photos and kind of really targeting what you want from those photos can be seen as a negative thing, which I find is interesting. But, you're now talking about how important it is to make a conscious effort on your socials, because no one's forcing you to do it. So, and that's what it comes down to, because it's one of those things that if you have a poor, say, Instagram presence and you drive people to Instagram regardless, that's probably going to be more negative than positive. So you might as well put in the effort when you're posting content.
I think the thing is, when it comes to Instagram, it definitely is a beast. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It is a time-sucking, scary thing of a place, but it is dictated by the world that we live in at the moment. I am big on Instagram because I recognize that people value Instagram. Some days it makes me feel very vapid to be Instagramming everything that I'm doing. Sometimes I do really wish I could just live my life and not put it on Instagram. But that is what the people who use that platform are looking for. So it's about recognizing that and adapting your content that showcases your business in a way that people want to see. So yeah, I'm a really big advocate for using social media, but just not using it blindly, being smart about the kind of content that you're posting on social media, and also, narrowing down on what the people that follow your page or look for your content are actually wanting, from that platform.
Yeah. And I must say, I love the fact that you use a conversational language and on the appropriate medium, which I find Instagram, your language is much more conversational, and within the Facebook groups, I would say is probably more conversational as well. But then you really do tailor your content, even how you kind of the language you use for the medium, which again is a very valuable tip, rather than just sharing your Instagram photos onto Facebook, which I'm very guilty of doing, because it's so much easier to click share to Facebook.
I need to fix that up myself as well. It is very tricky. I think getting the balance right is, the balance is so fine between spending the right amount of time on your social media and then spending too much. I think that it's kind of like, they get to a point where you've been as productive as possible, and then it's so easy to stay on that platform and just waste time. So I'm not going to lie that that's not something that I struggle with myself. But yeah, it's about, recognizing the kind of people and the kind of numbers of people as well. So in my closed group, I try and really get more two-way conversation going, because I think, okay, well, if I was talking to 600 people in a room, this is what I would want to say to them. But if I'm on, if I'm in an auditorium speaking to 12,500, it's going to be a little bit less two-way, and it's going to want to have a little bit more purpose and a little more inspirational, feeling behind it.
Yeah. So, and another thing that I think you've touched on is, so when you post onto Instagram or Facebook, do you actually think about, in real life, would I say this or do this? Is that something you actively do?
I really do, because at the end of the day, I guess my main goal on Instagram is to turn those relationships into paying customers.
Mm.
And, that may be one-on-one in person or maybe one-on-one online. And so I don't want them to have followed me on Instagram and bought into what I have to say and the tone of voice that I have to say it in, to then work with me and go, you are literally nothing like you posted that. That's going to be really disheartening to both myself and that future customer. So being, speaking the way that I speak and trying to be, using a tone of voice that is reflective of how I actually am is really important to me.
Yeah. So you're not putting on this fake facade. You're essentially the same person. And I guess talking about passive income and et cetera, it's important because if you were managing two different personalities in real life and online, I'd imagine that I'd just get lost in which one I have to be in the different
Yeah,
scenarios. It's just so much easier to be
totally.
authentic,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And the thing is, when it comes to, I know that authenticity is such an overused buzzword, but when you are authentic, you are also attracting the kind of people that want to invest in you. If you're trying to be somebody that you're not, or you're trying to be someone that you've seen on Instagram that has worked really well for that person, there is always going to be that disharmony. And one thing that I have found about Instagram, which has really blown me away and surprised me, is how intuitive that platform is. So if you are ever being fake or doing something that doesn't align with who you really are, it will show in the engagement. People can sense it a mile off, which is so surprising.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's why it's just really important to actually get real comfortable real quick with who you are and just be that and not try and be someone else.
Yeah, just put it out there. I love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So before we get into the top 12, let's talk about where we can find you, your Instagram, your Facebook, and your website as well. Do you
Do it.
want to give us your handles?
Yeah, great. So Instagram is at _women's_collective. If you go into your Facebook and then just / or backslash, I always forget the two, the Women's Collective, no spaces, no punctuation. The website is thecollectiveco.net. And from any of those platforms, you should be able to reach me pretty easily.
Awesome. Fantastic. So let's get into the top 12. Now, the top 12 are 12 top things within 3 different areas that I want this to be the kind of thing that people can go, if I don't listen to anything else, I want to listen to the top 12. I want to use these tools. I want to read these books, listen to these podcasts, and live my life this way. So let's start. Top 3 books or podcasts that you recommend. What are the top 3?
Okay. So The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is phenomenal. If you have not read that book, go and do it. It will help you with basically every area of your life, but mostly with the way that you relate to the world, which I think you cannot be successful in business if you don't understand your place in the world and how you feel and your personal development. That's number 1. And then my second 2 would also be 2 by the same author. You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero is a phenomenal book. It is much more woo-woo than I thought that I would enjoy. Like, in terms of, it's definitely about manifestation and thinking about your position in the universe and why you are where you are. And it's just not something that I ever thought that I would relate to. I tend to be quite practical and quite straight down the line.
Down to earth. Yeah,
I
get that.
really enjoyed that book. I really, really enjoyed it. And then her follow-up book to that was You Are a Badass at Making Money. And that was essentially the same kind of thing, but around manifesting money. And I kid you not, with the month that I read that book, I nearly doubled or half increased on the math, but
increased by 50%.
made 50%. Yeah, increased by 50% my income, and that has been a pattern that has stayed since April, since I read that book. So
love it. So
I found that significantly helpful.
Yeah. So are you saying that if someone was to invest in you, that they'd see 50% growth month on month? Is that where you're at the moment?
Oh, look, yeah, sure. You can say that. I am really, side note, with my coaching, I'm trying to be really practical about where to in business. So, I'm not just about giving handy hints and tips. One of the things that we do spend a lot of time on is looking at revenue and going, okay, well, if you did this, this, and this, you could increase this revenue, you could double that product output, you could, do X, Y, Z. And that was one of the things that this book really helped me with. So highly recommend it.
Nice. Awesome. Okay. Now getting onto the software and, tools that you use, top three, what would you give
Yep.
us?
Okay. Canva is amazing. I'm obsessed with that website slash app. It is going to basically put graphic designers out of business. Um, sorry, any graphic designers out there. But it's just making life so much easier. Lightroom, either on mobile or on desktop, photo editing is phenomenal. Again, it's just going to take your content to a whole new level. And then I would probably look at something like a scheduling app where you can schedule your content for Instagram. It just takes the guesswork out of posting. You can
Mhm.
have a look at what your feed is going to look like, and then it's pre-set up for you. So all you have to do is just jump on and post it. Or there even are some that will automatically post for you. I personally don't recommend that because the whole point of Instagram is to connect with people, and you kind of want to be on there posting photos yourself. But if you're really time poor, they do have that functionality.
Okay. And what tool do you use at the moment? Do you know? Do you remember?
I'm currently using on and it's just a pretty basic scheduling tool. You can
Hmm.
preload photos in there, but what I like about that app is that it will also allow you to do some basic editing in that app along with scheduling. So
Nice.
some of the other ones you can only preload the photos, but you can't edit them in that app.
Mhm.
So I'll still always edit in Lightroom first, but sometimes when I add the photos in, I'll notice that like maybe one of them is just a little bit too light or a little bit too dark, and I'll just tweak the adjustments on that one.
Awesome. The next three. So the top three mantras that you try and live by. What would you
Ooh,
say?
this is a great one. Okay, my one of my mantras, which sounds so hilarious, but I'm just gonna go with it, is I love money and money loves me. It's my quote that I got from the book,
Uh-huh.
and that's it's just something that whenever I'm feeling stressed about money, I just like say it out loud. I feel like an idiot, but it just kind of shakes up my vibe, it shakes up my mood, and I just kind of move on. Another one is imperfectly perfect, which is just about recognizing that there is no such thing as perfection, and you will just continue to be growing and changing, and you'll never be perfect, but you'll also that's how you're meant to be.
Hmm.
And I guess the third one would probably be this too will pass. Because I am someone that is incredibly emotional, incredibly sensitive, and I have struggled a lot with depression and anxiety in my life, and which is not something that I'm ever shy about talking about. But sometimes the world could be perfect, and my brain tries to tell me that the sky is falling, and I just
Hmm.
have to remind myself that this will pass. This mood, this day, this challenge, it will pass.
Love it. Love it. Love it all. That was really the top 12. One last thing I want to just quickly chat to you about before we hang up is you mentioned money a bunch of times. I love that you're just owning the fact that, yes, you want to give back. Yes, you want to help people, but you still love money because ultimately, I think the media and the world is very quick to go, Instagram's a bad thing. It's all negative. Social media is negative.
Mm-hmm.
Money's negative. You shouldn't go after money.
Mm-hmm.
My rebuttal for that has been that money is a tool that you need to use. It is part of how society is set
Mm-hmm.
up. Without it, you can't really accomplish a whole lot. No matter what anyone says, at the end of the day, money is a very valuable and useful tool. And do you agree with the fact that you can build an authentic community, you can give back to people, and you can still be focused on the financial side of things as well?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I'll try and simplify my view to money so that people don't have to listen to me talk for days. But I believe that if you're doing what you were put on this earth to do, and for me that is it's taken me a few years to figure it out, but that is to improve people's lives, to coach and to teach, because I am so passionate about that. If I'm doing that for free, if I'm not charging for that, then I have to have a 9 to 5 day job, and I have to give all of my energy there, or as much of my energy as it requires, and then I only have what is left over to give back to people. But if I can get comfortable with the fact that I will charge money for that particular service, then that allows me to spend the best of my energy and the best of my time giving people that. And it's actually, I know this sounds like so like just funny to hear, but I genuinely believe that I am changing lives and I am making a difference. And
I don't think
the
that's funny,
money that
just
I
saying.
charge people for that,
I think that's
The money
awesome.
that I
Like, you got to
charge
own it.
allows, yeah, it allows me to be able to give people the best of my time. And one thing that I am so passionate about is being able to give back to people tenfold. So, my yes, you might pay for an hour of my time, but one thing that you're always going to get that I can't put a figure on is a direct relationship with me, and a direct way to connect with another human being, to be inspired. I'm inspired by my clients as well, and none of this would be possible without money changing hands. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I think where you should be ashamed about charging money is if you are charging it to people that can't afford it, if you are selling it to people that can't pay for it, or if you're charging something that you cannot validate. That's
Yeah.
where the shame, I guess, comes in.
So basically be ashamed if you've got to convince someone to basically steal their money from
Yeah,
them, or if you
yeah. Honestly, the one
knowing.
thing
So you go.
Yeah. I was going to say, honestly, the one thing that I say to my clients all the time, or my potential clients, is if they say to me, oh, I'm just going to think about it, or I'm going to, in a couple of weeks or whatever, the one thing I always say is, don't stress. I am always here. Like, when you're ready, sure, come on. But I
Yeah.
will literally never say, here's my calendar, book in, do this, do that, like, until someone has come to me and been 100% okay, this is what I want to do. Because it
Yeah.
doesn't help them and it doesn't help me, and we start off on the wrong foot.
Wrong foot. Yeah, fantastic. All right. I'm not gonna take any more of your time. Thanks for featuring on our podcast, Georgie from the
No
Women's
problem.
Collective.
Thank you for having me. It was awesome. Great chat, mate. And yeah.